They executed a human tourist. The supreme praetor of the Kalan Dominion liked to make statements. When the Kalan battlecruiser Vindicator intercepted a lone, civilian-registered Terran pleasure yacht drifting near the disputed rim of Sector 7, the praetor saw an educational opportunity. The human tourist inside, a junior software archivist named Chloe Jenkins, who had merely taken a wrong jump coordinate while touring a nebula, was dragged before the central holoscreen of the flagship. The humans have been silent for a century, Praetor Vrax declared to his assembled bridge officers, and a mandatory broadcast feed sent to every vassal state in the Orion Arm. They hide behind their censor curtain, pretending to be peaceful isolationists. Let us test the mettle of these so-called isolationists. Execute the carbon unit. Let us see if the primitives weep or cower. Chloe did not cower. As the Plasmararch executioner stepped forward, she looked directly into the recording lens, shook her head with mild annoyance, and said, "You really shouldn't have done that. My dad is going to be so ticked off about the paperwork." The laser fell. The broadcast cut to black. The Kalan Dominion waited for the reaction. They expected panic. They expected a diplomatic cable begging for the return of the remains, or perhaps a clumsy, uncoordinated retaliatory strike by a handful of outdated cruisers. Instead, they got silence. For 3 days, Earth remained entirely dead to subspace communications. The sensor curtain, a thick wall of high-frequency white noise that had blocked all deep space telemetry from the Sol system for 100 years, remained completely opaque. Vrax laughed from his obsidian throne. "Cowards, they are paralyzed with fear." On the 4th day, the sky tore open. It didn't happen at the edge of the system, where sublight sensors could track an approaching fleet. It happened everywhere, instantaneously, across a 3-light-year radius. The spatial fabric of the local sector didn't ripple. It shattered like thin glass. From folded dimensions previously thought mathematically impossible to sustain, drop-point anomalies flared into existence. 1 ship, then 10, then 1,000. The bridge officers of the Vindicator stopped breathing. The tactical consoles wailed a shrill, dying shriek as the sensor arrays were instantly blinded, not by human jamming, but by the sheer, unadulterated mass of incoming metallic volume. "Praetor," the primary sensor officer screamed, his multi-jointed fingers flying across his console in absolute panic. "Mass detector overload, multiple hyperspace wake signatures detected." "How many?" Vrax barked, rising from his throne, his scales flushing a sickly pale yellow. 100, 500. 18,246, sir." The sheer scale of the emergence defied the laws of physics. They didn't look like standard warships. They were massive, brutalist structures of dark, light-absorbing titanium carbide alloy shaped like jagged wedges. They had been hidden for a century, not in deep space, but inside the hollowed-out, artificially stabilized cores of 12 separate dwarf stars and gas giants surrounding the Orion Arm. While the rest of the galaxy assumed humanity was quietly painting landscapes and writing poetry behind their locked doors, humanity had been turning 12 entire star systems into an industrial forge. And now the curtain dropped. 18,000 ships formed a tight, geometric sphere around the Kalan Vanguard fleet. Not a single shot was fired. No warning demands were broadcast. No ultimatums were issued. Instead, every single human vessel illuminated a single, massive bow-mounted aperture. A device the Kalan Tactical Database had no classification for, but which human engineers referred to as a kinetic delivery ledger. On the bridge of the flagship, Vrax's personal terminal chimed. It wasn't an attack alarm. It was an incoming priority message from the Terran Department of Administrative Corrections. Subject: Execution of civilian personnel, file #8849C. Action taken, account debited, asset forfeiture authorized. Open fire, Vrax shrieked, his composure completely shattering. Obliterate them. The Kalan fleet tried to raise shields, but the human ships didn't use lasers or plasma. They fired massive, relativistic slugs of compressed, degenerate matter projectiles that weighed as much as a small moon, accelerated to 99% the speed of light. They didn't aim for the Kalan shields. They aimed for the space around them, calculating gravitational shear with absolute, terrifying precision. In a fraction of a second, 18,000 kinetic strikes converged on the coordinates of the Kalan vanguard. There was no fiery explosion, no roaring blast of atmospheric combustion. There was only a sudden, absolute vacuum as the kinetic shockwave compressed the local spacetime, snuffing out the Kalan flagship and its accompanying dreadnoughts like a candle flame in a hurricane. When the light cleared, the Kalan Armada, the greatest military force in the Eastern Quadrant, was gone. No debris field remained, just a quiet, empty expanse of space, perfectly neat, perfectly silent. On a secure channel across the galaxy, a single human voice broke the silence, broadcasting on every military and civilian frequency. "This is General Marcus Vance," the voice said calmly, sounding entirely like a man calling customer service to complain about a delayed package. "You executed a civilian archivist to test our resolve. Your fleet has been repossessed to cover the cost of the paperwork, the emotional damages, and the inconvenience." The broadcast paused for a fraction of a second. "We are opening the censor curtain now. If anyone has any further questions about our municipal policies, please direct them to our legal department. Have a nice day." The silence that followed the vaporization of the Kalan vanguard was not the quiet of a vacuum. It was the suffocating stillness of an entire galaxy holding its collective breath. Across 300 star systems, trillions of sentients stared at silent, frozen holoscreens. The Kalan Dominion had spent 8 centuries dictating terms to the Orion Arm, reducing rival empires to ash with casual, ritualistic cruelty. In less than 40 seconds, their entire military backbone had been repossessed, liquidated, and converted into an entry on a Terran municipal ledger. On Station Null Zero, the Galactic Council's Grand Assembly Hall looked like a tomb. The Supreme Arbitrator sat frozen in his high-backed central chair, his primary mandibles twitching erratically. The multi-eyed dignitaries of the Outer Rim were huddled in shivering clusters, whispering frantic prayers to deities who had clearly abandoned them. They didn't even use a dreadnought fleet as we understand it," a trembling avian ambassador whispered, his voice cracking. "Those 18,000 hulls. The telemetry scans show they were built out of the extracted mantle layers of dead gas giants. They didn't just hide behind a sensor curtain. They turned 12 star systems into a dormant shipyard." "And the execution," another voice stammered. Vrax thought he was making a political statement. He thought he was proving human weakness. Instead, a heavy, obsidian-shelled counselor muttered grimly. He handed them an itemized invoice for the universe. Back in Geneva, inside the stark, glass-walled offices of the Department of Administrative Corrections, General Marcus Vance stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out the floor-to-ceiling window at the bright, indifferent blue of Earth's sky. The door slid open, and Sarah Chen stepped in, holding a glowing, double-width data tablet that flickered with a blinding waterfall of incoming galactic transmissions. "General," Sarah said, her voice a mix of awe and mild exhaustion, "the Kalan capital world has surrendered unconditionally. They didn't even wait for us to send a landing party. Their High Senate preemptively dismantled their planetary defense grid, and mailed the activation keys to our embassy in Sector 4. Vance didn't turn around immediately. He took a slow, measured breath, watching a flock of birds bank against a cloudless morning. "And the other empires?" Vance asked quietly. "Lingering outside our quarantine perimeter," Sarah replied, tapping the tablet. "The Orion Syndicate, the Varian Concordat, the whole lot of them. They aren't massing fleets, sir, they're filing applications. We have 400 interstellar ambassadors currently camped outside our customs checkpoints, begging to be voluntarily reclassified as municipal protectorates so they can pay their taxes on time." A faint, tired smile touched the corners of Vance's mouth. "They finally figured it out, didn't they?" "They did," Sarah smiled. "They realized that humanity isn't an isolationist hermit kingdom. We're just an extremely thorough landlord who spent 100 years renovating the apartment building while the tenants were out throwing tantrums." Vance turned away from the window, walking back toward his desk, where a fresh, steaming cup of black coffee sat waiting. He picked it up, took a sip, and looked down at his terminal, where a blinking notification indicated a new priority message from the Outer Rim. "Open the communication channel," Vance instructed calmly. "Which one, sir?" "All of them," Vance said, his eyes reflecting the steady, unblinking green light of the terminal. "Let the galaxy know that our legal department is open for business, and tell them if they want to keep their stars, they need to start filing their zoning permits." The transmission lines across the Orion arm didn't just open, they flooded. Within minutes of General Vance's broadcast, the subspace relays were inundated with so many frantic diplomatic requests, supplications, and panicked administrative forms that the central routing servers in Geneva began to hum with a low, ozone-scented heat. Empires that had not spoken to one another in millennia were suddenly sharing queue numbers like impatient citizens at a crowded post office. On Station Null Zero, the Galactic Council had officially suspended all legislative debates. The Grand Assembly Hall had been hastily converted into a regional processing center for the Terran Department of Administrative Corrections. Rows of sleek, obsidian and chrome terminal kiosks, bearing the unmistakable logo of a minimalist globe wrapped in a green checkmark, had been teleported directly onto the chamber floor by human logistics drones. Alien dignitaries in elaborate ceremonial robes, multi-jointed arthropods in shimmering silk wraps, and towering silicon-based lifeforms stood awkwardly in line behind one another, clutching digitized parchment applications. "Next, please," a bored-looking human civil servant named Kevin, wearing a short-sleeved blue button-down shirt and a plastic visitor badge, called out into the cavernous hall. He tapped a stylus against his tablet, not even looking up as a towering, multi-eyed warlord from the Varian Concordat shuffled forward. "Warlord Zalvor of the Ninth Fleet," the alien rumbled, his voice vibrating the glass water pitcher on Kevin's desk. "We wish to file our voluntary reclassification paperwork. We brought our planetary deeds, our stellar coordinate registries, and—" Kevin held up a single finger, cutting him off, and finally looked up. "Did you fill out Form 1040 Alpha regarding stellar asset depreciation?" Kevin asked flatly. Zalvor blinked his primary and secondary eyes in sheer panic. We brought the tax logs from the last 3 cycles." "You need Form 1040 Alpha," Kevin sighed, sliding a digital stylus across the desk. "You can't re-register a star system without accounting for local nebula drift. Step aside, fill it out at the kiosk by the water cooler, and get back in line. Next." The warlord shrank back, utterly demoralized, replaced instantly by an ambassador from the Orion Syndicate who looked like she was about to burst into tears. Meanwhile, deep in the secure command vaults beneath the Rocky Mountains, the frantic pace of galactic conquest had been replaced by the quiet, soul-crushing reality of bureaucratic paperwork. General Marcus Vance sat at his desk, staring at a holographic chart that tracked the peaceful annexation of 400 star systems. There were no smoking ruins, no shattered fleets, no planetary invasions. Just a massive, glowing green ledger showing a steady stream of municipal tax, revenues, infrastructure upgrades, and zoning compliance fees pouring into the Terran treasury. Sarah Chen walked into the office, carrying a steaming mug of coffee and dropping a heavy, old-fashioned paper folder onto Vance's desk. "What's this?" Vance asked, raising an eyebrow. "A petition from the Outer Rim Fringe," Sarah said, leaning against the corner of the desk, with a smirk. "A coalition of independent rogue traders and Outer Rim corsairs. They heard about how we repossessed the Kalan Vanguard, and they want to know if they can legally incorporate as a garbage collection and municipal towing contractor for our sector." Vance picked up the folder, flipping open the cover to reveal a surprisingly neat handwritten contract signed in glittering plasma ink. "Pirates wanting to become unionized waste management technicians," Vance murmured, a slow smile spreading across his face. "They said they're tired of dodging patrols and want stable dental benefits," Sarah chuckled. "And honestly, sir, their hauling specs are impressive. They cleaned up the entire debris field from the Valkyrie incident in under 6 hours and recycled the scrap into municipal park benches for the lunar colonies." Vance set the folder down, leaning back in his chair as he looked out the window at the peaceful, sunlit landscape of Earth. The century behind the censor curtain, the silent preparations, the cold calculus of Terran Doctrine 7. It had all culminated in the most terrifyingly effective weapon humanity had ever devised. Not a dreadnought, not a super laser. An audit. "Approved," Vance said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Tell them they start on Monday, and make sure they get uniforms. If we're going to run an interstellar municipal empire, we are going to look professional doing it." The ink on the garbage contract rider was barely dry when the first structural audit of the newly incorporated Orion Municipal Zone triggered a quiet, entirely unprecedented phenomenon across the outer rims. Space, as it turned out, was remarkably messy. For eons, galactic empires had treated the vacuum between stars like an endless cosmic attic, a place to dump obsolete battlecruisers, abandoned mining rigs, rogue asteroid fragments, and the glowing, hazardous husks of dead reactors. To the ancient civilizations, it was just the void. To the newly minted Terran Department of Administrative Corrections, it was a severe code violation. On Station Null Zero, the human civil servants had barely unpacked their coffee makers when the automated zoning scanners began pinging with red alert notifications. Kevin, still manning the primary processing desk, rubbed his temples as a towering, multi-jointed representative from a corporate mining conglomerate slammed a glowing red citation onto the counter. "What is this?" The mining executive clicked angrily, his mandibles vibrating with indignation. "Your automated inspection drones just slapped a 30 million unit fine on our primary asteroid refinery in Sector 9. They said our orbital trajectory violates municipal parking ordinances." Kevin didn't look up from his spreadsheet. He took a slow sip of lukewarm coffee, clicked his mouse, and turned his monitor around. "See that dotted line right there?" Kevin pointed a yellow highlighter at a complex holographic grid. "That's the designated shipping lane for the inner system passenger liners. Your mining rig is currently parked 600 kilometers inside the passing lane, and you haven't paid your cosmic littering fees since the 4th galactic epoch. That asteroid has floated there for 4,000 years. The executive protested, his color shifting from green to a furious mottled crimson. "It is a natural celestial landmark." "It was a natural hazard," Kevin corrected smoothly, tapping a key. Your fine has been automatically debited from your corporate escrow account. Alternatively, you can pay it off by dispatching your extraction crews to clear the space debris field orbiting the third moon of Kepler. You have 48 standard hours to comply. Next. The executive stammered, opened his mouth to argue, and then looked past Kevin's shoulder at the wall behind the desk. There, hanging neatly in a sleek, minimalist chrome frame, was the official charter of the Terran Municipal Zone, right underneath a framed photograph of a smiling General Marcus Vance holding a very large, very efficient stapler. The mining executive quietly gathered his papers, bowed his head, and shuffled away into the crowd. Back in Geneva, General Vance stood before the grand floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching a quiet, steady stream of autonomous cargo shuttles drift across the upper stratosphere. They weren't warships bristling with plasma cannons or dreadnoughts designed to shatter worlds. They were heavy-duty towing vessels, scrap processing barges, and planetary sanitation, hulls painted a crisp, reassuring shade of municipal white. Sarah Chen stepped into the office, holding a fresh datapad. "General," Sarah reported, her voice carrying a note of disbelief, "you're not going to believe the telemetry reports from the Outer Rim." "Let me guess," Vance said without turning around. "The pirates are sweeping the asteroid belts." "Better than that," Sarah grinned, tapping the screen. "Our newly unionized sanitation fleet has officially cleared out every derelict warship, rogue satellite, and radioactive waste drum within 50 parsecs of the core worlds. The entire Orion arm is cleaner than it has been in 10,000 years." Vance finally turned around, a faint, amused smile playing across his lips. "And the local populations?" "They love it," Sarah chuckled. "Property values in Sector 4 have skyrocketed by 400% because the view of the nebula isn't obscured by floating junk anymore. Even the old imperial royal families are sending us thank you notes because their orbital mansions no longer have to dodge shrapnel." Vance walked over to his desk, picked up his coffee cup, and looked down at the blinking notification light on his terminal. It wasn't a distress call, nor was it a threat of war. It was a routine zoning request from a distant star system, asking if humanity could please send an inspector to certify their new planetary park. "Send them the paperwork," Vance said softly, taking a sip of his coffee. "And make sure they check the trash cans. We have a reputation to maintain. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.